those are human beings in there, and we need to help.
If we solve homelessness for everybody, it benefits everybody in the country. But for some reason, we resist that.
California holds more than half of all unsheltered homeless people in the United States, 53%, and has the highest number of homeless encampments. That's what we're talking about today on Fill in the Blanks, because we may have half, but the rest of them are throughout the United States. Clusters of tent cities line almost every block here, but you have them in your city as well. In an effort to take aim at the issues, major cities across the United States, including LA, Portland, Austin, Houston, San Francisco, are passing bills that will effectively ban homeless encampments from certain areas. Now, homeless advocates argue banning and sweeping homeless encampments is inhumane, doesn't solve the problem, and will ultimately create even bigger issues. To go deeper into this crisis, I am speaking with the guy. I'm talking about Donald Whitehead, Executive Director, National Coalition for the Homeless. He brings more than 20 years of experience in serving and advocating for persons experiencing homelessness to NCH, including 5 years experiencing homelessness himself. And he brings a unique combination of direct service to those experiencing homelessness, as well as years of advocacy for systemic change to end homelessness through increased federal investment in housing and services, as well as an end to policies that actually criminalize homelessness. And you're right, I said criminalize homelessness, even though there are Supreme Court decisions that say you can't do that if there are not alternatives. Donald, welcome. Thank you so much for coming and taking the time to do this.
Thank you, Dr. Phil. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you for elevating the issue of homelessness.
Well, it's a big issue. And I want to start out by saying something that you underline so well and personify so well. And that is that these are human beings. They're sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters. This situation is getting worse, not better right now. Is that a fair statement?
It is a fair statement. We've seen unsheltered homelessness grow all across the country, and it's not just in urban communities like Los Angeles. It's happening in rural communities. It's happening in suburban communities, and we have definitely seen an increase, and that's especially unsheltered homelessness over the last 5 years.
Let's talk about this so people understand our terminology, because if we're just going to be raw and candid about this, people in businesses, people in neighborhoods, people who take their kids to school, they don't want to walk by these encampments. Most of the time they can't. You can't walk down the sidewalk because they set up tents and then they expand because they have their belongings and all of that out there, and they don't smell good. They don't look good. And I say that not being judgmental, but it's just the fact. For everybody that says how unpleasant that is, imagine living in it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Absolutely. And, again, and I say this often, we live in the richest country in the world. No one should have to live in those conditions. And many times these are people who don't want to be in that situation. I would say none of them want to be in that situation, but they're forced into it. They're forced into it because of economic conditions, because of the lack of treatment, because of structural racism in some cases. So these are underlying issues that we have to address to be able to get people so they don't have to live in that. And you're right. The more we talk about the realities, it's not, some people think it's like people, urban camping, if you will, that it's some kind of leisurely activity. And we know that that's far from the truth. It's dangerous. All of the things you talked about exist. And so we have to do better. People should not have to be forced to live like that.
Okay, now let me play devil's advocate. I don't want anybody rolling their eyes about this and saying, first thing you did was play the race card here and say, well, some of it is structured racism. First off, what percentage of the population are people of color?
So African Americans make up about 40% of the population. They only make up 13% of the general population in America.
Yeah.
When you look at Pacific Islanders, it's a 9-to-1 ratio. If you look at Native American, indigenous people, it's a 3-to-1 ratio. And the reason why structural racism is why we think that exists is that if you look at poverty, there is a relationship to poverty that changes when you talk about these people of color. So if you look at people of color, the number of homeless people, the number actually is higher than those in poverty. But for all other races, white Americans, Asian Americans, that number goes down. So poverty isn't the underlying factor. So it has to be some of the traditional structural issues that have plagued people of color for decades. So when we talk about structural issues, we talk about the fact that people discriminate in who they have in their housing. So in order for us to be able to create enough housing units, we have to have people that don't deny people housing because of their race. We know that that still exists in this country. When we started out in the 30s with housing programs, those programs were not, we had what was called redlining. And so people were not able to purchase homes if they were people of color or immigrants also. And that's changed over the centuries. Some people who immigrated from Ireland or some Asian countries or other parts of Europe were considered other. And so Black people and other people of color have continued to be other. And so when we created housing programs like public housing, that housing was segregated at the beginning. And it was actually segregated in places that were integrated already. The jobs programs created in the New Deal, people of color were not able to access those jobs. Servicemen returning from the World War, veterans, there were GI Bills, but people of color were not able to get into those GI Bills. And what was created was impoverished communities, and you know, they are what people consider ghettos. And what happened is not only were people not able to generate wealth, and one of the easiest way to generate wealth in this country is through home ownership. So if you don't own a home, you can't generate wealth. And so we have had decades of disinvestment in those communities. And now they're food deserts. They don't have the healthcare facilities. They don't have banks. They have predatory lenders. And so that cycle's continued. And even in the home ownership, 2 weeks ago in Baltimore, Maryland, there were 2 professors at Johns Hopkins University. They were a mixed race couple. There was an appraisal of their housing by an appraiser, of course. The first time it was the African-American woman who met the appraiser. They appraised the house and she got a price. They thought it was low, so they took all of her identity out of the house. The white husband was the person who got the house appraised, and there was a $236,000 difference. When I look at other factors, and these are things that, sometimes people can write off things. We can talk about the over exposure of people of color in the criminal justice system. Although, if you think about the crimes related to substance abuse, the levels of use are the same. However, the people who are convicted of those crimes and the length of sentences is different if you're a person of color. And the one that really sticks out to me is in healthcare. So if you look at maternal health, for instance, if you take a look at that issue, the death of mothers and the death of children is the same for mothers of color with advanced degrees. That is at the same level of women, white women with less than a 7th grade education. So there's something wrong there.
That's a very real thing, and I just wanted people to hear a nuts and bolts explanation of that, so it's not just some liberal explanation. Just do the math. It's very simple to trace, and it's very real. we've got how many homeless people across America right now, people experiencing homelessness? How many would you say, using the most common sense definition? I know we get into a lot of different definitions, but the most common sense definition, how many people are experiencing homelessness?
So I think the number is closer to 5 million, and it may even be higher than that, in my opinion. And this is Donald Whitehead's opinion. So, we have a Congress that's looking at creating solutions for 500,000 people when there's more like 5 million people. And, if we don't ever raise those resources to the scale, I think we're almost there in Build Back Better, the original version that had like $75 million for housing. I'm sorry, $25 billion for housing, 70 million for public housing alone. We were getting close, and that wasn't even enough. But we keep coming up with these myopic solutions.
Well, however they got there, however these people that are living on the streets, whether they're hopping from shelter to shelter, whether it's chronic, whether they're 6 months or they're 6 years, whether they got there through discrimination, mental illness, drug addiction, whatever it is, the solution, as you say, is going to have to be universal, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. The biggest challenge that I scratch my head about when I'm thinking about this is you've got a big percentage that have become addicts. You've got a big percentage that are mentally ill.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a big percentage that are just financially disadvantaged and just simply don't have the earning power, the wherewithal, the traction to get to the point where they can get a place to live, pay the deposits for utilities, and sustain it. I mean, I'm sure there are more, and there's a lot of overlap within those, but those are 3 different groups that are going to need nuances to their solutions. But all of them have some things in common. You can describe it a lot of different ways, but one way we've talked about it before is like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The first thing you've got to do is actually meet their survival needs, where they know, I'm not going to freeze to death, I'm not going to starve to death, I'm not going to be murdered, I'm not going to die from the elements or whatever. I've at least got that covered. And that's why you say that it begins with getting them in a safe home.
Yes.
If you put somebody in jail, you're talking, what, $40,000, $50,000 a year?
Absolutely.
Per inmate?
Absolutely.
That's not cheap.
It's not cheap at all. And it's a cycle. So that person goes to jail. Now they can't get into public housing. They can't get into the other housing programs like the Housing Choice Voucher Program. They can't get jobs. No one, people, there's this long list I used to get of people that would hire ex-offenders. When I was doing direct service, I'd send them there, and nobody ever got hired. So, it's hard to get a job. It's hard to get, you lose the opportunity to vote. I mean, you lose your connection to society.
Yeah.
So the cost is even higher than that, initial cost of jailing them.
And a lot of these people that are in jail, and certainly would be in jail if that model is allowed to go forward, let's just be honest, they're in jail because they're homeless. They're loitering, or because they've got nothing else to do, they default to drugs. Their crime is having nothing going for them at that point.
Absolutely. It's a cascading cycle. So in states like Florida, if you're caught urinating in public, and nobody's condoning urinating in public, but you have to urinate.
You got to go.
If you get caught, you're a sex offender. And so not only are you arrested, you've become a sex offender. And if you think it's hard to get a job with a criminal record, if you're a sex offender, you can't even go to some shelters. And so, it's really a ridiculous, of course, we don't want anybody who's exposing themselves in public, but that's not who's getting charged with those kinds of crimes. It's somebody who's in the woods or behind a building, and somebody just comes upon them, and their life is totally ruined at that point.
one of the problems that exist here in LA on Skid Row is they know exactly when these people get paid.
Mm-hmm.
So the drug dealers from the gangs show up.
They do.
The day they get paid. And often it's rival gangs which are in a turf war to control that area, and they show up at the same time, and then they have conflict. Now, all of these people that are living on Skid Row on the sidewalks and all get caught up in the crossfire of this, and you'll have people get shot, get stabbed, get hurt because of these warring factions that are there to control the drug trade.
Exactly.
But those people will get paid in the morning and their money's gone in an hour.
Yes.
Because the predators swoop in there and get their money, and now they're broke until the next payday.
And you know, therein lies another issue, and that's the issue of treatment for substance abuse, or mental health services, which we severely lack in this country. And you know, some of those drug dealers are so insidious. What they will do is give people, you know, testers, they call them, and expect, or they'll give people the drugs prior to the check coming the day before. So they, you know, that person ends up owing a whole check. And, you know, this is America. And this is the kind of environment that people with medical issues, you know, substance abuse and mental health are both medical issues. And we should be providing the resources that are necessary for people.
Is there a country that has this figured out?
There are some European countries that have done a much better job. Finland is one example. And the thing about Finland is that they have a right to housing, and they have the housing and supportive services, the Housing First program. The difference with their Housing First is it's housing first for everybody. If you become homeless, you get a housing unit. And so and then they attach whatever supportive services are necessary. We have permanent supportive housing. You have to qualify. You have to have a disability. You have to be homeless for a year consecutively, or have had 4 episodes in 3 years. So that's about 10 to 20% of the population nationally.
How do we motivate those people where they say, okay, I've been given a break here, and by golly, I'm going to hang on to this. I'm going to make this work. This is a launch pad. This isn't a soft place to fall. This isn't a hammock. This is a place to lay my head until I can get on my feet.
Sure. I think there's a number of things. So first, one thing is that any of those housing units, if people do have an income source, they do have to pay into that housing. So you pay 30% of your income. So people on Social Security, people with minimum wage jobs, they're still paying some portion of that. But it goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once you stabilize them in their housing, everything else kind of filters up from there. So people do take pride in that housing, and people do aspire for greater levels of success.
How much follow-up and how much casework do these people get once they're in a stable home?
Well, so permanent supportive housing is not just the housing, it's housing and services. So everything you just described is what that case manager is trying to do. But they're giving the person the agency to make that decision. And it isn't, you have to do this tomorrow. You can get there over a period of time. You can gradually get there. And I believe that we should also do that in the shelter system. And that's what I did in the shelter I operated in Orlando. So, you know, I had job fairs. I had recreational activities. I had motivational segments that happened at the shelter. So the housing first mentality doesn't have to be giving someone a house right then. It could also be looking to see what that next option is while they're in a shelter situation. So giving them case management, giving them all kinds of things that build on their own skills, the asset building that you talked about. And, it's incredibly tough to do that for everybody, but everybody has that something. They were an artist, they were a welder, they were a singer, they worked in a factory. And if you do that, what you described, if you tap into whatever that skill set is, and that's what case managers are doing every day. They're working with people within those permanent supportive housing units, and they're also providing people that have already done that. I had a guy that he became a mentor, and what he said is the reason I do this is I want people to see that they can get to the other side by seeing me do it myself.
How much do you see it now with people that you've gotten off the street, gotten into a stable home? How much do they actually attend day treatment for rehab? How much do they actually go to work? What are the stats on people that take initiative and go to the next level?
It's hard to quantify that across the country, but I know my success rates in transitional and shelter were like in the 70% range. If you give people that opportunity, they'll take advantage of it. Not 100%, but I believe that most of the programs, like permanent supportive housing, has a 90% success rate for people just staying in the housing. And if they stay in the housing, everything else is possible. Over several years, it's still at 70%. Obviously we lose some people. These are the most vulnerable people on the street. So their life expectancy is going to be a little shorter. But even 4 years out, people are still at the 70% range.
When I was on the street, I had a job every day. And I think a lot of people out there did have a job every day.
I did as well.
Yeah, I was young, but I was tall, so I looked old enough to have a job. But, I just went up and down the street. And this was back in the 60s. There weren't so many big chain stores. There were a lot of mom and pops in downtown Kansas City, and you just go from door to door. Hey, do you need any work done today? And you get a lot of no's. So you customize your pitch and say, you got a stock room that needs cleaning up? And I said, no, get out of here. And then pretty soon the guy's wife said, hey, he's got a good point. Looks like a tornado went through there.
Absolutely.
Pretty soon you got a job cleaning up a stock room, and it lasts 2 or 3 days. And then they take you to the guy 2 doors down. They and said, this kid did a really good job cleaning up my stock room. Then you're cleaning up his down there. And you're right. It's kind of a contagion effect. You see your buddy and say, hey, I got a job. Get a job, man. Let me introduce you to somebody. You can help me do this. I think people want to do better. They just need that first step. And it just seems to me that what you're doing makes all the sense in the world. Mm-hmm. I think the audience today, when you and I were working together, it seemed like we put a face on this.
Yes.
And I know you didn't like seeing those TikTok videos, but I thought it was good to say this is less than 1%.
Right, he did.
But if we don't acknowledge that, people say we're just whitewashing this and not acknowledging that these places are stinky and that there are some dangerous characters in there. And if we acknowledge, they say, okay, they're being straight up about this, but those are human beings in there and we need to help. These people on the street aren't free.
No.
So putting them in a home first situation, you got to look at the delta because they're not free on the street.
No.
We're looking at the difference between the two. It's not zero versus putting them into an apartment or a house. There's a cost that's there to begin with.
And that's one of the big issues around criminalization, because all of that money that's already been spent, whether it's through hiring outreach workers or case managers or intake workers, every time you move someone, you have to start that process over again. And so we're wasting dollars, not only the cost of incarcerating people, we're wasting the HUD dollars who've already been used on those people, or the healthcare for the homeless dollars that go into people getting free access to healthcare. Those dollars are actually going out the window, and they need to be doubled down on every time we move people. They have to restart that process.
My problem with that sort of thing is they become less inconvenient. They don't have to walk past them and stuff. But
yes.
That makes me think about pre-Dorothea Dix, when we were just warehousing these people, chain them
Yes.
to a wall, they don't bother you so much. You can't do that. You can't put people in chemical straitjackets. You can't put them in involuntary mental health commitments when you have no exit strategy whatsoever. What are you going to do? You put them in a chemical straitjacket and they're not inconvenient.
Exactly.
They sit over here and drool because you've got them so medicated that they become lethargic. But then what's your exit strategy? It's like aging out of foster care. What do you do when they leave?
And that is what people don't understand, is that all of those systems are feeding people back into the homeless population.
Of course it does.
And if we don't address, again, if we don't have a whole government approach, which provides resources for people with mental health issues, the idea of taking people out of those large facilities where they were chemically straitjacketed, where they were sprayed with water hoses, that was the right thing to do. But what happened is what's happening with homeless people now. The Kennedy administration did it, and there were supposed to be all these community-based facilities for people. They still haven't been built to this day, and those people are actually ending up in jails and on the streets of our community. That is a huge part of the problem, deinstitutionalization without the resources to put people in. And we're just doing it again. We're making it convenient for people, but we haven't solved the problem. We're just making people disappear, basically.
Exactly. And look, I get it. If I had a business down on the beach and I was selling souvenirs or whatever to people, and I relied on walk-in traffic, and it was my livelihood to feed my family, and all of a sudden people couldn't or did not want to walk in there because they couldn't get in because it was smelly and they were afraid of the people and they were getting panhandled and all of that, and that was my business and my livelihood that I worked for, I would be very upset about that. I totally get that, and I would want that situation fixed. But I understand all you're going to do is move it down to your neighbor's place if you don't come up with a real solution for this.
And that's all we're saying. We want the same thing. We don't want those business owners or property owners or children going to school to have to encounter people on the street, but we want permanent solutions to that. We don't want to move them to the next school or the next community or the next business. And we have to get serious about that.
Those businesses go out of business, you're going to have a hard time coming up with those multi-trillion dollars to fix this.
Absolutely.
So it's got to be a balance for everybody here. Yeah, I was so proud to meet Ryan and Maeve today because what an intelligent, straight-up young man and all, which is so antithetical to what people have in their mind,
Exactly.
stereotypically. Every time I've gone down and taken time to walk these encampments and talk to the people here or San Francisco or Dallas or Washington Heights in New York, there are some really charming people in there that just need a hand up.
You know, if you think about yourself and kind of people that we respect in this community, just like Ryan, who've gone through this issue, and just think of how many people we respect that have bipolar disorder or some other mental health or behavioral health disorder. But if you think about the other successful people like Tyler Perry and Jim Carrey, and I could go on, Tiffany Haddish, there's this whole group of people who've gone through that experience, and they're people who are revered in society today. And those people are walking the streets of Los Angeles today, people who have the same degree of talent, the same intellect, and if we provide them the resources, they become a benefit to our community.
We just have to stop and realize these are men and women, human beings, like I said, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, brothers, and sisters. We just got to give them a chance to get back in the game.
Absolutely.
You're doing the things that I think need to happen for them to get back in the game, and I support what you're doing. I want to continue to support what you're doing. I don't think you're the king of giveaway. I think you're wanting these people to be responsible and accountable. I think you're trying to give them a launch pad, not a hammock.
Absolutely.
And that's a big, big difference.
Absolutely. Because we need their voices too.
Yeah. What a talent pool
Absolutely.
is being wasted.
For so many reasons, unemployment. If we give people the resources they need to get back on their feet, there's your unemployment gap right there. We put people to work, and they can help, change the economy and help heal all kinds of wounds.
I'll bet you half of that population could work in the tech, computer industry, and it's needed. We just have to continue to do this. If I can help you bring heat to this issue anyway and any time, put me in, Coach.
You're doing it. You're doing it. And I appreciate you. And I know you'll continue to do it. And I'm just so thankful that you've chosen this as an issue that you want to support, because, I reach out to, some of the people you mentioned all the time, because I just think them making a statement about it in whatever small way they can, people want to be near them. They want to follow them. They want to be attached to them. And if they're attached to the solutions, it'll just make so much difference in this world.
Well, let's commit to continuing to partner on this together. And I hope you'll come back when
anytime you ask me,
we can do this again, because I think we brought a lot of attention to this today. We've done it before. We'll continue to do it. And if we need to hit them up on Capitol Hill, we'll go do that too.
Absolutely. You got an invitation waiting to come to Capitol Hill.
Fair enough. Donald, thank you for taking the time to do this.
Well, thank you for having me. And thank you for taking the time to do it.
Well, I'm going to continue, as I know you will. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.